Today, many Americans are feeling afraid of their own government, whether it's at universities or in the law firms or those who work for the Justice Department or within the intelligence community or the State Department. People are afraid of losing their jobs. They're afraid of being singled out for their views. They're afraid of having their taxes audited by a hostile government. And when we look for other periods of time in America where there has been such prevalent fear, there is no perfect analog, but one that does come to mind is the period of Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism. Because this was a long time ago, in the 1950s, many people have only a dim understanding of what McCarthyism was and who Joseph McCarthy was and the role that he played. So today I thought I would talk a little bit about McCarthyism and what we can learn from that period. So Joseph McCarthy was a US Senator from Wisconsin. His career began before World War II, when his first office was that of local judge in Wisconsin. He joined the Marine Corps in World War II and was a gunnery officer, a tail gunner, actually an intelligence briefer as well. And there are many claims that he exaggerated his war record, but when he left the service after World War II, part of his campaign slogan was Tail Gunner Joe. That, because of his exaggerated war record, was ultimately used as kind of a joke. People mocked Tail Gunner Joe. But when he ran for the Senate as a Republican, his slogan was, Congress needs, or the Senate needs, a tail gunner. So McCarthy is elected to the US Senate, and for the first 3 years, he's fairly unremarkable in the Senate. Doesn't really make much of an impression on people until he gives a speech in West Virginia in which he claims, among other things, to have a list of communists who are working in the State Department. Now, this was after the fall of China to communism. It was after the Soviet Union had developed a nuclear weapon. It was during an early but very tense period of the Cold War. And so this claim by McCarthy of having a list of communists at the State Department was sensational. It drew a lot of attention, quite unexpectedly, to McCarthy. And McCarthy ran with it. He used the perch that he had on a subcommittee of government operations that allowed him to investigate the presence or absence of communists in the State Department. And he held a series of hearings over time, examining first communist influence in the State Department and then communists in other branches of the federal government, ultimately focusing on the Army. Most of his allegations were exaggerated, they were sensationalized, or just plain false. But he ruined a great many careers and lives in the process. It all came to a head when he was investigating allegations of communism or communist sympathies in the Army. And here the Army counterattacked by making the claim that McCarthy had sought preferential treatment for one of his staff when it came to service in the military. And so there were concurrent investigations going on of McCarthy and alleged favoritism towards his staff, but also McCarthy's investigation of the Army. Meanwhile, powerful voices in journalism were taking on this demagogue, Edward R. Murrow being the most prominent. Here is what Edward R. Murrow had to say about McCarthy and his tactics.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine, and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who feared to write, to speak, to associate, and to defend causes that were for the moment unpopular. This is no time for men who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent, or for those who approve. As a nation, we have come into our full inheritance at a tender age. We proclaim ourselves, as indeed we are, the defenders of freedom wherever it continues to exist in the world. But we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home.
But it was ultimately an encounter with Joseph Nye Welch, an Army lawyer, that brought McCarthy's investigation and career to an end. This unexpected encounter took place because McCarthy took aim at one of the lawyers in Welch's firm. That was the last straw for Joseph Nye Welch, and this is his famous response.
Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
Now, I don't imagine that Joseph Nye Welch knew that his statement that day would have such a career-ending impact. But after that showdown in the committee room, people started to tune out Joseph McCarthy. People stopped covering all of his sensational allegations. He was ultimately held in low regard by his colleagues after having been a powerhouse out on the campaign trail. And indeed, his speeches would, over the next 3 years, be greeted largely by silence in the chamber. He died about 3 years later of hepatitis, at least that's what the death certificate apparently said, though most thought it was cirrhosis of the liver from drinking. I think this period holds several lessons for us today. You can imagine if Joseph McCarthy had the power to go through everyone's social media posts, how he would have weaponized that to be used against people, just as indeed the Trump administration is doing today as it combs through people's social media posts to try to ferret out people they believe insufficiently loyal to the person of Donald Trump. But as Edward R. Murrow said, what is going to be necessary to put an end to this period of fear, this period of intimidation, is for all of us working together not to succumb to this climate of fear, to demonstrate our own personal courage just as Joseph Nye Welch did. Now, I don't imagine that Joseph Nye Welch understood the pivotal role he would play in putting an end to this period of fear and intimidation. And it remains to be seen who will play that pivotal role today. But as Edward R. Murrow said, it really calls upon all of us to push back against this climate of fear and intimidation. But one thing I am confident of, just as it was the case for Joseph McCarthy, so it will be the case for Donald Trump. We will look back on this period and wonder how such a demagogue ever took power, why they lasted as long as they did, and we will thank our stars that they're finally gone.